Call to order the City Council work session for CV's Grand Forks for Tuesday, May 11th is now 5 o'clock. Would City Clerk please call roll?
Mayor Steve Gander.
Here.
Council President Mark Olstead.
Here.
Council Vice President Tim Riepel.
Here.
Council Members Clarence Vetter, Dale Helms.
Here.
Tim Johnson, Mark Demers, Brian Larson.
Here.
Does turn quorum. Number 1, consider approval of the agreements from the 2016 TAP grant funds for Safe Kids. Ms. Ellis.
Thank you, Council President. We're in the process of opening up these grant funds that we received from the 2016 Transportation Alternatives Project. As you recall, a portion of that application was for a sidewalk on 13th and 20th, and then a corresponding application went with it for Safe Kids to do some school safety work and provide support materials to that. So we've received the 2 agreements, and we need to approve the resolution to execute those agreements and enter into the contract with MnDOT. Just so you're aware, I have the incorrect numbers on the RCA, but they are correct in the resolution. The $21,600 for the force account is materials, not for the programming, but for the educational materials and equipment. And the $15,900 is the preliminary engineering agreement, and that's for their programming salaries and actual work. So the resolution is correct, but I inverted them in the RCA. So I guess I'm just asking if we can move this forward to council to approve those agreements and enter into those or execute those and get ready for Safe Kids to start in the fall. School resumes.
Anybody have any questions from Ellis? I see none, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Number 2, discussion on Sidewalk Café policy ordinance. Megan.
Okay. I searched the state and grabbed and borrowed from a few different cities for this. I put some stuff together. I sent it to Ron. As you saw in the RCA, he does have some suggestions for this. So there's just a few things that I would like direction from the council before kind of putting this in finalized terms to bring back for kind of a final review. I'm assuming you guys will want this to be a part of the ordinance. But I just want to make sure, do you want it as a policy or ordinance? The time frame for these to be issued. In the what I had drafted, there were a few different options. One city passed or approved these for a 3-year period. Most of them, it was annually for a 1-year period. There was one city that only issued them from April 1st to October 31st. And then the fee, do we want to charge a fee for these? If so, what amount? Again, $100 for a 3-year permit was in here, $60 for April 1st to October 31st, $50 for the permit, and if they're serving liquor, an additional $50, were some of the variations that I found. And then the last thing, should there be restrictions where it can be utilized? And what I mean by that is, do we only let them utilize it during, obviously, their hours that they're open? There are some places, if they are close to a residential area, they may limit it to like 11 o'clock. Our quiet hours start at 10 o'clock. And one of the businesses that I'm thinking of, they do have residences right above their location. So, you know, maybe it's something we include and maybe not implement or, you know, implement it right away, but have it there as a backup in case there are issues. We can revert back to the ordinance and say, you know, due to this, we need to restrict the hours. So, and I realize I rambled through that kind of quick. I know we have a lot to get through tonight, but if I could just get a little bit of direction on those items, I would appreciate it.
So if we're going to charge a fee on this, what costs on our end, administrative costs, would we cover? And I think if that's what our goal is, to make sure that we cover our administrative costs, I think we should at least do that.
Yep.
Whatever dollar amount that is.
Okay.
Should just be a nominal fee, hopefully.
Yeah. I mean, I would assume that's wouldn't take much, but Ryan?
Just to comment on the time frame, I know it seems a little preposterous, but we saw the Spud Junior was very creative with their outdoor ice houses, and I think to build upon that this could be a 12-month permit, because I would encourage that type of creative outdoor use, I guess, in our area, whatever you want to call it. I thought that was very cool. So.
And that's one reason why I'm asking, and just as long as it's not an issue for snow removal on the sidewalk, or, we make sure it's up, that they keep that area clean and that there is passage for people where there is no snow. This last year we didn't have very much, so it wasn't an issue, but I could possibly look and see if I could find something that addresses snow removal as well.
And then one more comment or question, and I'm new at this, forgive me, but our downtown district seems like the area that would most likely utilize this outdoor seating. Is that clearly defined enough where you could say within this commercial business zone we allow this type of business to happen, or is there not a very hard and fast line there?
There's not a hard and fast line at this point. The only real restriction, one of the things included in here was if they had to get, or if another entity was involved, such as MnDOT, because MnDOT has right-of-way and right-of-way access, it's their control. So like 4th Street is kind of off limits unless you get it approved by them. So other than that, I mean, if other restaurants show up other places, if they are kind of confined and don't have that outdoor seating, this would allow for that, as long as, we had the space so that could happen. But we could restrict it to the downtown area, or however you guys see fit.
Yeah, I guess I'm not proposing we restrict it to the downtown area. There's a few other restaurants outside of there that we wouldn't want to forget about just for some nominal reason.
Yep.
I'd be okay with the annual. Hang on a second, Ron, please. I would be okay with the annual also. I mean, and with the hours, I guess, I'm not quite sure if there are quiet hours or at 10, if that constitutes even downtown area, if there's stuff going on. But maybe a little discussion from everybody else, what time frame we would have on that. So, Mr. Colstead, sorry.
Well, no, the only thing I was going to make a comment on would be I would have it open to anybody or any restaurant that would potentially need it. However, I don't believe there's any others that are actually on a right-of-way or a sidewalk. They're usually like McDonald's or Casa Mexico or some of those. They have their own parking lots, so you wouldn't be looking at a sidewalk requirement.
Mayor.
Yeah, if there would be a way for it to default to their normal hours of operation, and then I don't know if Ron could weigh in on this, if there was a problem with an adjacent residential property, if it could potentially be reduced in individual cases. I don't know if there would be a way to trigger that, but I'd love to see them be able to operate in their normal hours of operation.
Well, and I think what we can do, Mayor Gander, is I'll look at the specifics, but you can always revisit it if you start getting complaints for some apparent reason, whether it's residential or blocking the sidewalk or not following the ordinance, and then you could restrict it, or potentially, if it was egregious, you could revoke.
That would come under the suspension and revocation area, so we've got latitude there.
Anybody else have any questions or comments or guidance? Is everybody okay with keeping it in the normal course of business hours? And
Okay. So I'll have Ron probably draft this in an ordinance form, and we'll bring it back to a work session for like a final review. Thank you.
move on to number 3, consider a Sawgrass Court paving petition. Mr. Murphy, and we also have Mr. Kidwell on.
Yep, thank you, Council President. I'll start with this, and then maybe I'll turn over to Mr. Kidwell if he has anything to add. I did receive a phone call and an email from Mr. Kidwell asking about
Mr. Murphy, you're breaking up.
Thank you. I did not have my microphone on. Thank you. I did receive an email from Mr. Kidwell asking about what the process was to pave Sawgrass Court. There are 8 lots out there, 6 of them have homes on them, and that the cul-de-sac out there has never been paved, and it has been unpaved for quite some time. And so I know they've had issues in each year with snow removal, and that it puts the gravel and rocks and things like that onto the yards, and it's probably time to get paved. So Mr. Kidwell did go around. I did submit the information to him as far as what the petition looks like and what would be required. He did go around and get the petition signed by all of the occupied lots that were out there. The 2 vacant lots are actually owned by the city. So the city would need to approve on that. So of the occupied lots, he did have 100% signature rate on that. But I said the 2 are still vacant with the city, and they still would like to go through with the 35% criteria. That way they would still be able to view the feasibility report in case it comes back fairly, pretty high, and it would be not feasible for them to absorb those costs. So I guess what I'm looking for is if the council has any questions on this particular application, any questions for Mr. Kidwell there. Otherwise, what we will do is at the next council meeting, we'll have an agenda item for the council to accept the petition and to begin the preparation of the plans and specs for that particular project. So with that, Mr. Kidwell, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, you did a great job of summarizing.
Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Murphy at all? Steve?
David, moving forward at the next council meeting, would you be ordering plans and specs, or actually ordering us to complete the report of feasibility?
Oh, I'm sorry. Report of feasibility.
Yeah.
Sorry. Did I say plans and specs?
Correct.
Okay, got a little ahead of myself. Yes. Report of feasibility. Yes, thank you.
Mr. Helms?
Thank you, Mr. President. Does that street currently, does it have any curb and gutter or anything like that up there, or is it just strictly like a gravel alleyway?
There's curb and gutter there.
Curb and gutter.
There's curb and gutter, so none of that stuff would be, I wouldn't have to do anything like that, just basically put the paving in for the road, huh?
Typically what we
Okay.
do, is we'll go review, look at the curb and gutter, because, over the years with snow removal stuff, there might be some curb that's broke up,
Right.
damage that we would want to fix before the paving, but for the most part, it's going to be just pulling out the gravel and paving it.
Right, okay, thanks.
Anybody else have anything? So we'll look forward to it next Tuesday.
Correct.
We'll go from there. Anything else, Mr. J? Sorry. Mr. Kidwell?
No, that'll do it. I appreciate your time to consider this. It's been 10 to 12 years this way, and it'd be nice to get it finished.
Sounds good. Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, move on. Number 4, discussion on farmland leases. Mr. Murphy. It's Mr. Murphy's night.
Yes. Thank you, Council President. I don't really need a lot from the council on this particular one, just to make sure you're in that you agree with the process on this. As you're aware, the city has some farmland outside of the flood area that we do rent out to typically adjacent farmers that farm the land nearby it. And typically the rates on that have been fairly low because they're flood prone and that. So, but the leases are set to expire here after this year, and we're looking at the land rent has not been changed or raised on that for quite a while. So just did a quick check, and it looks like we are low compared to what the going rate is for land that is still prone to flooding. So what I'm looking for is, if the council is okay, I would start the process then of getting the leases set for 2022 and do a 10% increase on those.
Mr. Riepel?
I'd be for the 10% increase. I think we need to bring it up a little bit. I think we're still low at the 10% increase.
Yeah, we're charging $100 an acre right now.
Yep. That'd be fine.
Anybody else have anything? Mayor?
How many year leases are we going for with this?
The last few we've had have been 3-year leases.
Anybody else? Mr. Demers?
What do we estimate that in
The market is, depending where it is, how flood prone it is, can be up to 150 an acre for a property that is susceptible to flooding. And again, I get that, but he said it could be up to that 150. And I understand your point there. The one thing that I did get from the appraiser that I did talk to, in the area that does flood, it varies quite a bit, but as far as how easy it is to get to it, how close it is to the property that the other farmer that they're renting it to is already farming. It depends on what side of the river it's on. It's, for whatever reason, it sounds like on the other side and the North Dakota side, it goes for a little bit more than it does here on the Minnesota side. So, so he said that the reason I put that in there, he said it could go the way he said it, as high as 150. So depending with those kind of variables. So I thought that's just where I came up with the number.
I think from a business standpoint, it's a little nicer to cash flow, more of an incremental change, and you can catch up in the next 10 years if you want to. But I think from a business planning standpoint, it's nice for the farmer to kind of operate in more of an incremental change. I'd be fine with the 10.
And then, yeah, I could look at it, maybe do like a smaller increase. If we're doing a 3-year lease, just do like a 10. A 5 or something,
10, 2, 2 or something,
yeah.
Get close to inflation.
Okay.
And do we know what
acres?
And the number of acres, I don't have that in here. I had gotten a report, maybe from the Department of Agriculture is the one that actually sets the, here it is, how many acres are tillable and those kind of things. No, it's just for, I know we have 75 on one lot, I think 62. I'd say altogether, I'd say under 200.
is there anything preventing us
No, there's nothing preventing that, no.
I'm not sure who was speaking, but we need to turn the mics on because you're not picking up.
Sorry, Ron.
That's okay.
Anybody else have any questions? Everybody's fine with the 10%?
No.
I'll bring back a proposal with it, yeah.
Do 10, 5, and 5? I don't, not to me.
I'll bring that back and let's see what they say. And I'll let the farmers know.
We don't want to take a 25% jump right off the top, though.
Okay. Move on to number 5, request for direction on updating city ordinances.
Okay. I will, just thank you, Councilman President. I will open this up and then I will defer this to Councilmember Demers. I know this is a item that he was looking at and it brought forward. He had suggested that the municipal code be reviewed due to the fact that the code has had several additions over the years and several amendments, but it has not been reviewed or updated in a very long time, similar to what we had just went through with the city charter. So with that, as I agree that it's probably time to update it and at least get it into a more complete version because we have amendments at the end and all those kind of things. So the question I have for the council is, are you interested in doing something similar to the Charter Commission, or if Mr. Demers had any ideas about kind of how to update it and what process we should use to update it?
Mr. Demers?
Wait for the president. Thank you, Mr. President and Mr. Murphy, for introducing this. Like I said at the end of I think it was the previous meeting, that I do think, we're beyond years of looking at our code, not just for form, because I know Ron has in the past, probably 10, 12 years ago, kind of went through a recodification process that went through, making sure that we were in alignment with state statute, making sure that our code was, coded correctly and all those things. So it isn't so much a form issue, but I think if we do this, we should take into account, the form and making sure it's all one place, searchable, all those type of things. But I think just as we went through our last issue with downtown development and stuff, there is some maybe not clarity on some of the things. And I would just say maybe it's a good practice for having certain code that is kind of given responsibility by particular boards or commissions. So say planning and zoning has certain codes that they are responsible of reviewing on a certain time frame. Park and Rec, they could look at certain things. We could divvy those up however we felt was appropriate, and then I'm sure there's some set of code that kind of falls in the administration or in the in the gaps that I don't know if it's something this council or board would take up, or if it's something that the Charter Commission would take up, or if it's something that we want to set up a whole new commission for. I don't know if it rises to the level of setting up a whole nother commission, but like I said, I think the first step is parting out those areas that are already under the purview of a board or commission that we should have just kind of regularly going through those as, to make sure that they're up to date with what we want to do, looking for conflict, all those type of things. Enforceability, I guess that's one of the things too I look at is, we have lots of codes on our books that we don't really want to enforce. So we tell our enforcement agents, whether it's the police or Nancy or whoever, like, we don't really want to enforce this or something. Well, if that's the case, let's get it off our books. All those type of things. As far as how we do it, I'm agnostic on it. I think there are some standing structures that we have that could handle a bulk of it, and then we could move on from there.
Okay, yeah, I guess in listening to Councilmember Demers' ideas there, I hadn't thought of that, but I think that's a really good way to start. And then at that point, we could determine if we need to take another step with either with the council or a commission like that. Since the majority of those do fall under certain purviews, either if there isn't a board or commission that's already in charge of it, like the park board, for those sections, just even like the department could review that, compile some of the ideas, and then bring that back. So I think that's a good way to start. So I'll take that as a direction.
No, I think it's probably the proper way to do it, is because they're going to be more in tune with what's going on and what they need and looking at it, and I'm sure the chief can handle it. Since Rod's here, you can take that on, right? Yeah, that's okay.
But I guess, yeah, and I would just say, just identifying maybe areas of conflict or maybe things that we're not considering since they're dealing with these on a daily basis.
Right.
And then just forwarding it back to us. I guarantee you there's a large chunk of the code that isn't going to be covered by boards and commissions directly. So at that point, I think we'll have to kind of figure out how we want to do that. If we want to just take sections of it, one section of that group once a year and just do it, over a 5-year course or something like that. I think that annual or that kind of regular review is something that we should build into our process.
And I think that's a good way to start. So I will take that in.
No,
Mayor, go ahead.
Did I say that out loud? I know from our work with the Charter Commission that there were many points along the way where, intuitively it looked like we should do this certain thing. And Mr. Gallstead said, well, that's pretty much in step with state statute. We've pretty much had to go to that letter of the state statute into this section. We can be more restrictive, but we can't be less restrictive, all that kind of stuff. And I know it's going to create a lot of work for Mr. Gallstead, but my sensibility says that any commission that takes up the question of working on this, Ron should be there. I know that's a kind of a big piece of work, but I wouldn't want somebody to take 1, 2, 3 hours and say we should do this, this, and this, only to find out from our city attorney we can't do any of it. And those 2, 3 hours were wasted. And so I do feel that given our work with the Charter Commission, that Ron needs to be there.
Anybody else have anything? Nancy?
Just so you're aware, every 5 years when we do our land use plan, that always triggers updates to our ordinance. And so that's where the 2018 review of our zoning districts came about. And Ron and I did go through Grand Forks's and added over 50 uses, whether permanent or conditional. And so because we are in that time frame again with the land use plan, we will probably take all of that input and then again review our ordinance starting next year and make some of those additions and corrections. I think one of our major ones this time would be reviewing the subdivision regulations, and then like our non-conforming uses variance section, those need to be cleaned up. So, but it is something that we do typically on a 5-year basis. So.
Mr. Larson?
Yeah, I would just add, I'm in favor of going through this process here. And as we go through it, similar to the land use process, I'd like to see an opportunity for public input as well. If it's through social media or through a website, could be a wonderful opportunity for a lot of residents to voice their opinions, and they would, get funneled through this charter commission that would review them as such.
Anybody else have anything? I think you have good direction, Mr. Murphy, to start out with.
Thank you. Yep, I do.
Okay. Number 6, request for budget priorities, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Council President. This is something that has come up several times over the last few years for the budgeting process. The council previously had asked that we start the budgeting process earlier, in May or June at the latest. So we are here in May. So we thought we would bring that forward. And the beginning of what we spoke about last year, that to begin the budgeting process, we would look at what some of our priorities were, and then, flesh it out from there. So, with the concept of meeting the top priorities, I did ask Finance Director Anderson to bring up some of the items that have come up throughout the years, particularly the ones those have been recurring items to put in there to maybe begin the discussion. Ms. Anderson did come up with several that we did put into the RCA here. Those are library personnel, police vehicles, sewage and stormwater rates for things like for replacements, street reconstruction projects, particularly seal coat and mill and overlay, the expansions of our parks and recs, daycare assistance, industrial park expansions. These are all items that have come up over the last couple of years. So put those in there for a starting point. Would take any direction from the council as far as areas that the council sees as a priority in our budget, and we'll move from there. And there's several that the council might have as priorities that we didn't have listed. These are just ones we had come up off the top of our heads.
Does anybody have any direction they want to give Mr. Murphy at this time? Or?
President Olsted?
I guess I'm going to go to Mr. Emery first.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't see his hand.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't know if Reed is on the line. I don't know. I mean, as you're looking at budgets and stuff too, probably just trail maintenance of all of our trails on the greenway system and stuff, because that's a major cost too.
Carla.
That was my same comment, so thank you, Steve.
Okay, does anybody else have anything? Mr. DeBurs.
Thank you, Mr. President. A couple things that I've been thinking about. we've talked about at the police department, we did some access management stuff, was it last year or into the spring or whatever? I would suggest that we look at, and we talked about this at Water and Light, Carla, right? That we should look at access management citywide, what those costs are, expanding on what we did at the police department, if that's the correct system. I guess working with Water and Light to see what's available. But I would think that that's something that we should do. I think, we've got pandemic type money that I think is specifically for some of that type of things. And we've seen how hard it is to do some of that stuff as we've gone through those. Now, hopefully we don't do shutdowns and lockdowns like this every year, but our access management is definitely turn of the century, or whatever. So I would like us to take a look at that in the budgeting process. Also, I think it may be prudent for us to look at, I don't know if it's an additional personnel, FTE, whatever you want to call it, to take on the role of like building and facility management, kind of take it, I don't know if I'm kind of blindsiding Nancy with this, but take that position kind of out of that role and create a position that maybe it's part Water and Light because of their mission, part city. I don't know how it would get funded, but that's why we want to put it into the budgeting process. But someone that is a building maintenance person that, goes through and is in charge of all that kind of stuff. Like I said, I don't know. I haven't run this by Nancy yet, but if she'd be willing to take that off her plate. But it just feels like we need someone that's their primary role. We're doing these buildings are getting older and older, post-flood. I think we need people that are on top of roof maintenance, on top of HVAC maintenance, on top of all these different systems we have, access management type things. I think it'd be interesting to go and delve into that topic in some sort of a budget management. And like I said, I'm not trying to say Nancy isn't doing this. It's a lot. I believe it's getting to the point where it's a full-time position just to maintain all the facilities, especially if we're looking at putting on more or expanded facilities in Park and Rec. So that's my salvo.
I'm going to go to Mr. Murphy, and then I'll go you to Mr. Gordy.
Okay. I guess that was a good point. Because of the flood, a lot of our buildings are around the same age. The library, the city hall here, I know the police department was refurbished around that same time, so they're going to start having some of the problems coming around at the same time as well. And I guess if we're going to, I'm not really sure what direction the council would like to take on this, but what I would think is if there's some things that the council really does have a burning passion about, I guess the question I would have is what level of comfort would the council have as far as what our levy increase would be, or what level you would be comfortable with, particularly if we're going to have to do things like start plugging in money for greenway maintenance and resurfacing. If we're going to have to start plugging in money for street reconstructions, mill and overlay, if we're going to be kicking in some of that, are any of those are important enough to the council that we would be willing to look at what that might do to the levy rate. So that kind of direction would be good to have from the council.
Mr. Gordy.
At the EDA meeting today, the board members talked about creating new city industrial space, which would mean expanding the industrial park, and perhaps Mr. Helms or Mr. Larson might want to elaborate a little bit.
Larson.
Yeah, I can go. I'll touch on Mr. Gordy's comment as well. The list here, David, is, it's a good list. There's a lot of important items here. I'm not really sure if I could rank these here live and in person for you, but I will comment on two that are close to my heart, I guess. The industrial park expansion, I think we can all recognize that that equals jobs here in East Grand Forks, which is of the utmost importance. Certainly you have the EDA's support there, so I think that's an important one to focus on. As well as daycare assistance. I can tell you as a parent of kids who have just grown through the daycare program here, high quality, affordable daycare is hard to find in the area. And if that is something that East Grand Forks offers, I feel certain that we will attract young families to East Grand Forks. We've got expansion in the industrial park. We've got good jobs. It all equals up to growth for our community. So those two areas are near and dear to my heart.
Mayor.
Come back to Mr. Demers' comments. I don't know if y'all have noticed, but sometimes it seems like Mr. Demers comes out of left field. But really his comments end up to be quite relevant, at the end of the day. And I do want to give just a little bit of context to what Mr. Demers was sharing. We know that the Water and Light Department also has a role in building maintenance. You serve on our Water and Light Commission. So you have that context, you have that relationship with the Water and Light, and I know there's been some thought that, maybe we can step it up a little bit on the Water and Light side and take a little more active role in the charge that they already have. So Water and Light is already charged to some extent with overseeing some of our property maintenance. And so you as liaison to the Water and Light have brought that thought back to the council that there could be a little change in how that's done. And I just wanted everybody to know it wasn't necessarily just you speaking on off the cuff, but really coming in as our liaison to Water and Light, who also has that charge in building maintenance. And I think that's worthy of consideration. And they're willing to take that role, whatever their role is now, and maybe build on that a little bit as well. And there again, to find that balance is critical. So.
And like I said, we haven't, at that board, we haven't decided, hey, this is what, we just are understanding that there's needs out there. And I think the discussion through the budget process needs to be, okay, if there are needs, are there ways that we can, get at, figuring out how to do that within that budget process that doesn't put onus on one or the other, but is there a sharing of process that can happen? Maybe, I don't know, and some of it happens after the meetings or whatever too. It's like maybe it's a FTE that is in the Water and Light, or maybe it's a FTE, and how does that work? And like I said, there's plenty of staff and people here that would have a better idea of maybe what that would look like, what it would cost, and ultimately, I don't know if it's actually, if it is a 1-to-1 ratio as far as cost and benefit. I don't know, but it appears that we're going to be dealing with this, and it's going to take more and more time, I think, and management. Like Mr. Murphy said, I think there's going to be a whole budgeting process just to managing how we do some of these things, because we're going to be hitting a lot of them at the same time. So, like I said, it's something it isn't out of left field, but right. Yes, it's something I think the budgeting process would be a good format for talking about it.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark. And then the other thought I have to your point on industrial park and jobs, I'm all in on that one. Now, what are the steps involved? So, for example, Mr. Vetter has said we should have the MPO now do a kind of a total study of the needs of the industrial park and go from there. So what's the role of the MPO? What's the role of our local EDA? And the people that are already there will have a lot of understanding of what the needs are, the shortcomings, whether it's the street systems or whatever we have in there. So we need the input of all of those people already in the industrial park. Maybe some of them want to expand already and are a little bit landlocked. And then I know through EDA, for example, we talked about maybe we don't want to use our Subtarget dollars on 10th because there are some other funding sources potentially for industrial parks, whether it's through deed or whatever other agency it might be. And so I guess I'd love to see that whole thing. It's a big, multifaceted move the minute you start to expand your industrial park, but I would love to see us undertake that, to get that moving. I'd love to see it. Thank you.
I think some of the things on here, I know that we're going to talk about sewer and stormwater fees after this. I think that's going to be taken off right away, so don't have to worry about that. Maybe some other ideas that we don't know about why we're doing it, maybe that's going to come up. But street reconstruction is probably going to be one of my things that we're going to have to look at constantly, but I think it's something that we're going to have to find I don't know if it's a cut and dry formula going forward, but I think it's going to have to be something we have to look at to make sure that we are keeping up. And I know that Jason does a great job of doing the cycles of looking at things, but I think we can look at that, but we always get back to how we're going to pay for it. I think that's our biggest hurdle on this, especially when it comes down to, go back to the specials, talk about that again. I'm sure you don't want to hear that talk again. So, but we have to think about that. Are we going to start doing the 1%, 2%, or maybe it's 0.5% or whatever percentage it is, just for street maintenance, and look at each road? Okay, this is how long it's going to take us to get through this again with using the formula and the software that Jason's been using, looking at how we're doing this stuff. But I think that's going to be one of the main things that we have to look at. But also, that same standpoint, we also have to work with Water and Light to make sure that we're not doing something, all of a sudden something happens down the road a year, and make sure we're in sync with them on where we're redoing roads like we're going to do on some other roads, and make sure we do the underground work that we have to do, and work with Mr. Emery on that. So I think a trio of, council, Mr. Emery, and Water and Light working together. But I think that's going to be the biggest thing, is street reconstruction. I think is one of my biggest ones that I will stand behind. So, anybody else have any input right now? Carlet.
Mr. President, so the police vehicle on that list actually has to do with when we did budgeting last year. We cut that back, and we talked about after we saw how the year had went, that there may be a possibility that we put that back on the list or amend our budget so they could buy that one vehicle that we cut out. And we're in the middle of our audit process, but we do know that our general fund, that revenues exceeded expenses by about $350,000. And so I know we've had conversations with Mike and with David, and we talked about bringing that up to see if that would be something they could purchase now. And Officer Highcheck is there. If we have questions, if anybody has questions, that's really why he's at the meeting for Mike today. So that one's actually something we could work on now and not wait till the budget process, because it is a vehicle they're looking to get as soon as possible.
So is this something that we said when we were looking at the budget to remove it, that we'd look at if we had additional funds?
Yes.
Or is this something that we took out, and now that we realize we're going to have additional funds, that we want to do it?
That was a discussion that we would come back after we knew how the year had ended, and maybe discuss it and see if it's something that we wanted to purchase in the middle of the year, or once we knew what our audit numbers look like.
And what's that dollar amount?
And the general fund is $350,000.
What's the dollar amount of the vehicle? And all the
$47,421.
That includes all striping, everything? So that'd be something that has to be brought back to work session?
Outfitted spot, ready to hit the road.
So that's something that'd have to be brought back to work session to get approved? Is that what you're asking, if you can do it?
We're asking is this something that we could bring back? He could bring back an RCA saying this is something that we'd like to purchase. This is something out of the ordinary, so we don't really know how it was supposed to be brought up, but so we brought it up at the work session to talk about it. And the dollar amount is $47,421. It would be under the state contract, so he wouldn't have to go and look for special bids. He's already done all that, and he's already looked at all the pricing for striping and such. That's correct, right, Rod?
That is correct.
I think bring it back for the work session in 2 weeks and have a discussion on it, I guess. If anybody else objects to that, you know. I think your mic's off, Mark.
Still working with the dealership in St. Cloud.
Okay, sorry it's off, but I'm just thinking about it.
Different vehicles. We
Yep.
have several vehicles with over 100,000 miles on them.
Right on, right on.
And that was going to be my point is, we've seen how short-sighted it is to take these things beyond their lifespan. And when you got Mr. Bubendorf saying, you know, about vehicles that this thing's done, it's over, it's done and over, because he can make them go forever almost. So when Mr. Bubendorf says it's over, it's over.
Anybody else have any input for Mr. Murphy?
One last.
President Olsted?
Yes, Nancy. Sorry, Mark.
Just so you're aware, Fire Chief Bushy and I will be bringing some information forward to you in regards to rental and commercial inspections. And so when we talk about FTE or needs right now, there are still services that ties in, Mark, to your reviewing ordinances. There are still services that we're struggling to meet or to, you know, meet the ordinance itself, one being the rental inspections and the commercial fire inspections. And so, you know, before we jump into facilities management, which I also agree is important, and I'll never say no to have it, not having it in my lap anymore. Right now, if we're looking at personnel, I know, you know, both the library and fire, you know, we've got services in review of our ordinances that we're going to need some help with if we want to continue. And I think the fire at Sickies kind of kick that into gear again, and we need to really kind of take a look at that in the budgeting process. So that would be something that both Jeff Bushy and I would find pretty important to look at for the budget next year.
And to that point, Nancy, you know, thinking about that facility management type personnel, one of the thoughts I had was to have that person be maybe an inspector based or have that type of background or something, so that if they could do the inspection of our own facilities and manage that, but also if needed to do, you know, rental inspection.
Yeah.
Because I know some of that has been hard to do too. So like I said, I think it's probably a discussion for a more in depth and for another day, but I think it is something that we need to really start looking at. So.
Okay. Thank you.
And I did want to say we should have a discussion about stimulus dollars, or I don't know what we all want to call them, but any money that we've received, and I don't know what, Carla, what that's all called or what, but we should have an actual plan for what we want to do with that. I don't want it to just be, and I don't anticipate anybody's doing this, but just kind of be enveloped into our budget and then not have any given any direction or purpose to those dollars. I think we should have a specific discussion on what we want to do with that money and what its purpose should be.
Carla?
Okay, just an update on the American Rescue Plan Act. They did come up with some more information today. I was supposed to have a webinar on it tomorrow, and it's been postponed because the people that are doing the webinar got some more information today, and so that's going to be next week. And so both Paul and I are looking at this. Things are changing daily, so we're kind of waiting to come up with any kind of plan and to bring any kind of information to you until we get all of the needed information. So, you know, I'm sorry that we haven't got you anything, but we really don't know for sure either. Like I said, I think to Water and Light, the League, Minnesota is putting on a webinar. And then the Minnesota GFOA is putting on a webinar. Baker Tilly is putting on a webinar. So we're just waiting for them to all collect, the specialists in this, to collect all the data so that we can get the data from them and then bring things to you to look at to see if what we can have a plan. I know Water and Light has always already looked at stuff because some of it talks about replacing lead lines. It talks about cleaning water. So it talks about technology upgrades. So there's lots in the works. I'm sorry I don't have anything for you, but as soon as we get that, we will try at least condense it for you so that there can be a plan.
And like I said, I don't think we need anything today. I just think as we move forward with our budgeting process, that should be a specific chunk of it, so. And I guess, not to keep at it, I would like to see it, through that budgeting process, kind of more of a presentation or kind of a maybe one-on-one, one department at a time, kind of come in over the process and really kind of drill into each budget. I feel like we've put so much onto staff, like we said, well, this is our goal, you guys go divvy it up and figure out what's best. And I feel like we've kind of lost a little bit of some of the granularity of those budgets. And not that I want to deal with every, stapler or tool, but like, I think we should have a more granular understanding of what we want on all these. And I think that it's really the board's purview to dictate where those changes go. We shouldn't put that on staff. It's really a policy decision. So that's just my request.
Anybody else have any input at this time? I see none, unless somebody else does. No? Got enough direction there so far, Mr. Murphy?
I do, thank you.
Okay. Number 7, discussion on sewage and stormwater fees. Mr. Murphy.
Thank you. This is in the same grain as the last agenda item that we just covered, but this one is a little bit more specific in two particular areas. One is the sewage fund and the stormwater fund are looking at running deficits, so we will need to raise the rates in order to alleviate some of the deficits. We've had some increase in costs for both of those funds, and what we're getting in revenue is not keeping up with that. And the second one is the idea of utilizing those funds for street reconstruction projects for using that to utilize to replace the sewer and storm sewer underneath those streets, and that would be a cost, and that would not be needed to be assessed to the adjoining property owners. It would be looked at more as a overall system cost. So with that, we've had a couple meetings on this as far as staff and with a couple of council members as well. So the numbers that it came up with was $5 per month increase in the sewage rate and a $4 per month increase in the storm sewer rate. Of the proposed $5 sewage increase, $3 would be to maintain the balance and $2 would be used for sewer replacement projects. And for the $4 for the stormwater, would be $2 to maintain the balance in the fund, and $2 would be used for stormwater replacement projects. So I will turn over to Carla if there's anything that I missed in the RCA or.
No, David, I think you did a good job on that. I guess the big thing would be if there's questions for Jason and I on, what that meant. The $1 generates about $50,000, so that's why we're looking at $2 for that $100,000 that the group and the mayor specifically talked about. And maybe use that $100,000 in 1 year, or looking ahead at projects, accumulate that and spend $200,000 or $250,000 a couple years down the road. So that's how that number came up with it.
Is this going to be just for hard assets, infrastructure? This has nothing to do with any other thing other than replacements and upkeep of those? What all falls underneath this? So you say there's going to be a certain dollar amount to do projects, but a certain amount to keep a project, a balance, a certain level. Is this going to be just for hard assets of replacing it, the infrastructure, or is this going to go into any cost of us having to do anything?
Council President, I believe if I understand your question correctly, yeah, the first portion of it, when we talk about maintaining the balance, that would be, for example, what we're paying the city of Grand Forks for our sewer, for them to take our sewer and treat it, other costs, meaning like staff costs, those types of things. Our expenses are starting to exceed our revenues on that, so we're looking at running a deficit on that. So that would be yeah, not hard costs. That would be like this, I guess, the soft costs. Built into that though is that we do some replacements on that, but it's not the major part. The major part of it is what our expenses are, other than the hard costs. The $2 for each one of those would be more. Yeah, the hard costs, that would be like replacements of the systems, pumps, those types of things, and the replacements for the street reconstructions.
I just wanted to make sure it was clear on what the dollar amounts were going to, because you can say you're going to increase these and, talk about the rates and talk about infrastructure, but there's also these other costs that people aren't aware of that.
Yeah, I believe Mr. Stordahl is here. You might, Jason, could you probably do a better job of elaborating on that than I would.
As far as the cost of keeping up our systems?
Yes.
Yeah, so, yeah, we have all kinds of different costs, I guess, as far as just repairing our main line, root cleaner, stuff like that. Just our regular annual cleaning costs would come from that. We do 1/5 of the city each year. Our pump upkeep, we try to replace typically 2 pumps per year for our pump maintenance program. We still have some costs on at the lagoons for mowing the EQ basin and stuff around there, and upkeep around there, and then just general lift station upkeep as well. Things like rails, guide rails for pumps, some of the stuff that we have to keep up on our SCADA system, our computer system for the lift stations. So that's where, and like Dave said too, as well as staff. That's our regular upkeep. That's part of what we do for our regular maintenance and upkeep each year.
Okay.
Could I just add to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
So that $3 is built into those things Jason talked about. The $2 would be strictly to replace lines that we would assess. And that's the understanding I got, and I believe Jason did. And so when we look at that $3 increase, we built that $3 in for those repairs. The $2 is strictly for replacement of lines so that they would not be assessed. And that would be the same for the stormwater account.
Mr. Emery, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I was going to say, the one thing even Jason and I have talked about is, we got a lot of old sewers that are in, some easement areas and things that are going to be very tough to get to. So, just even having the ability and the funds to reline some of those sewer lines in the future, just, as part of your kind of maintenance program too. So I think it's not always associated with a reconstruction project, but just, typical maintenance that Jason's going to have to do on an annual basis, whether it's relining, cleaning, that type of stuff. So,
no, I just wanted to be above board, and there's much more costs of upkeep and every daily costs and of things that we do to make sure these are running and up to maintenance grade, that we don't have any issues, so we can, the longevity of these pumps and whatever, keep down the cost, total big costs, so, Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. President. The way that I would like to see this come before the council, if it could, for our final decision, is there's a $5 increase that's proposed for the 2 funds, storm and sanitary sewer. And that would just keep those funds solvent. That would just make sure that the money coming in is at least equal to or greater than the amount going out. So the first $5, to me, I think for the council is a straightforward decision that we'd like to see that happen. Otherwise, those funds will be depleted and will be now upside down and trying to scramble for funds later. And again, so that $5, think of it, in my view, split between storm and sanitary, just to keep those funds solvent. The question I have then that to me is a little closer call, and frankly, whichever way the council decides, I'm totally fine with it, is the $4 additional, which would be a total of $9, that would be to do the additional maintenance on these two, again, storm and sanitary. So the $4 would be $2 for storm, $2 for sanitary sewer. That would enable us to be a little more proactive. When we are going to do a street project, we could look at the infrastructure under there if it's 50 years old or some amount that clearly is to the end of its usable life. You know, you've got storm sewer catch basins starting to settle here and there and everywhere, and it's all the same age. It's going to be like cancer. It'll just kind of leapfrog down through that whole section. The second portion of this, the $4 for additional maintenance, would open the door for us to be able to do that maintenance along with a street project and not have to assess the local residents and not have to come back 1 or 2 years later and tear up brand new pavement to come in and put that infrastructure. Not smart. Really, to be more strategic, like Water and Light is already doing. When you have a big renovation project going on, go ahead and, if it's ready, do the water mains right there at the same time. Dovetail those in together, one time being a lot more convenient also for our residents. They don't have to have it all torn up, 2 out of 5 years and not be able to park in their driveway. So I hope that when it comes before us, again, to me it's a very straightforward decision. The $5 keeps the storm and sanitary solvent. I feel like that's a pretty straightforward decision. The second part, the $4 that would enable us to be a little more proactive on maintenance. And to, I think, Mr. Emery, the point you were trying to make, that additional $4 on a year where we had a big street project could be used there, but maybe 3 out of 4 years, 4 out of 5 years, we don't have a street project. Those funds could still be allocated according to the top priorities, again, much like Water and Light does for water mains. Many years it's not done in conjunction with a street project, but if a big street project is taking place, they'll work together with that. And so I would hope when we see this coming before us for final decision, step one, $5 to keep the funds solvent, both storm and sanitary, I hope we say yes. On the $4 for the other, we just need to know. Because we're going to go back up to 5th and 20th and we're going to do a project up there. We just need to know what is the preference of the council on behalf of our community. Which way do you want to do that? Do we want to keep it all locally assessed, or are we willing to pick up some of those things and then other years to use those funds again to more proactively maintain the system? Thanks.
Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm in favor of moving this to the council, as I think everyone has said. But one comment on these type of funding mechanisms, I do think it's in our best interest here, where we're not making these large jumps every 5 to 10 years, and really kind of shocking our constituents. I would prefer to see a mechanism that has an escalator attached to it, so that these fees are increasing each year within some level of escalation or interest rates, some way to tie this to a reasonable increase each year, so that we're not going back to this in year 5 and asking for another 5 and 4. So that would be my recommendation, is to relook at the math, find a way to have that interest rate formula on there so that we can just set this and it just works for us going forward.
Mr. Repel.
I agree with Mr. Larson. We talked about this at Park and Rec, that the escalator is a good thing to do, so we're not taking that big jump all the time, whether it's 2% or 5%. Cognizant that inflation is going to hit us too. The way prices are going now.
Mr. Holmes.
Thank you. Is this part, I understand what we're talking about here, but is this part of what we're paying property taxes for now? Does property taxes take care of some of this right now?
No.
No? None of it goes to this?
Nope. The sewer, the two particular funds we're talking about right now, the sewer and sanitary sewer and storm sewer, those are enterprise funds, and by design, typically it's in the municipal government, it's advisable and recommended to not utilize property taxes for that. These are meant to be, the theory is that they're meant to be funded by those who are using them, meaning so if you use more more water and more sanitary sewer, you have a higher stake in it, so you pay more for it than what your property value is. So these are designed more for as an enterprise fund that should be paid for by the users.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Larson?
Just a comment, kind of building on what Dale asked, and forgive me if I'm misunderstanding you, but the second fund, though, that we're going to fund for replacement, that those dollars would essentially lower special assessment costs, wouldn't they, for homeowners?
Right.
So that we should be clear on that we're not impacting property taxes, but we are potentially lowering specials by collecting the money from everyone, in general terms, right?
That is correct, yes.
Okay.
My question,
Sorry, just
to Mr. Gallstead, doing that, does that have any impacts from the Minnesota statute allowing us to do it this way?
I have to look at it specifically, but if it's for like an enterprise sewer fund, there's mechanisms to do that. If you're talking about specifically street maintenance funds, right now that's not allowed. So it'd be like you're trying to set up a street maintenance district. That isn't allowed currently. So I'd have to look at the specific details of what we're going to use it for. But if it's a sewer fund, I think we're okay.
And I understand, what the street improvement district, and that was leading to my question of with these two funds, it's more specific to the way the mayor was explaining of how he wanted maybe it set up. And the comment from Mr. Larson about reducing specials, I want to make sure we're clear on that with our citizens, and also that we're not avoiding what we need, like we're trying to do with street improvement districts. So.
If I may, I do have some background in that is we've in a previous city that I worked with as long as you are using it, the issue that cities have run into is where they try to use enterprise funds to fund things that are outside of that particular enterprise, meaning if you try to use sanitary sewer funds to fund things that maybe aren't related to sanitary sewer or very marginally related to sanitary sewer. If we're looking at using this to replace sanitary sewer main lines that are underneath streets, from my experience, we'd be well within the letter of the law to utilize that. It would get a little bit more gray if you're talking about using those to replace individual service lines from the main to the house. You theoretically could, but you probably could do it, but it's a little bit more gray. But the main line that's underneath the street that's pretty well set that you can do that.
Do anybody else have any questions or comments? Mr. Demers, excuse me.
Mr. Murphy, Demers. Oh, sorry, the wrong way. Thank you, Mr. President. I've got a ton of thoughts on it, but I won't go into all of them. With a couple questions, the $2 additional charge on each of the utility fund fees, is that for utility replacement or utility and pavement replacement? Does that cover, what's the function?
I guess maybe I could answer that. The discussion that at least that I've been a part of, it's always been for the replacement of the line itself. There was some discussion about whether it could be used to replace the pavement portion of it on top of it, but correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of that would be if it was redoing the line itself. So, and again, that would be one of the areas where we'd be getting a little bit more gray, and we would want some direction from either the league or the city attorney on that, whether you could utilize that for the pavement portion on it if it's a street reconstruction project. I would say theoretically you could, but it's getting a little bit more gray than just replacing the line itself.
I'm just wondering which end is pushing which, and I have a sense I understand which end is.
Sorry, Mark, quick thought on that. I guess what I'd ask that we do on that question, find out legally what we can do and then decide what we prefer to do, right? If there's latitude to do it either way, then we can decide which way we want to do it. But clearly, if the law says we cannot do the pavement, then of course we would not do the pavement.
Well, I don't see why you couldn't. I mean, to me, if you were just doing sanitary replacement and it was its own project, you would replace the pavement. I get it. But I'm wondering more on a functional, how this is broken out, which will get to another point I want to make about this, but how this is broken out, it's unclear how much of that $2 and $2 or $4 is budgeted for actual replacement, or how much is budgeted for street replacement.
Mr. President, I think the clarity on that is it would be depend where the line is. And I know Jason and I have talked about this and other things, you know, so like on 20th, the sewer line is in the backyard.
Right.
So obviously we wouldn't fix the street. But if the sewer line was down the middle of the street, you know, we'd have to rip up the street to get to the line. So then we would pay for the paving of that street again because we tore it up.
Well, but if you coordinated, you would have the pavement portion be paid by the pavement and the utility portion be paid by the utility and the whatever. So I guess my point is this just a backwards way of trying to lower some portion of a paving, which I get your point. Yeah, it does lower the specials, but it puts it on somewhere else. I've been strongly in favor of putting everything into one fund and having the city pay for most of it through whether we do a levy or however we choose to do it. But my point on this is it seems like we're backing into something that we want to try to do, but we're only going to do it halfway because we really don't have the guts to say, well, this is really what it costs, so we're going to piece it up and try to divide it up so it makes it look like it's smaller, but we're really making it less complicated, less transparent for everybody, because none of these have an extended budget lined out. We're just saying, well, $5, $2. We want to make these funds, you know, be solvent. Well, how long are they solvent for? We haven't done any extended budgeting for this, which brings me back to my other point is maybe that should be part of our budget discussion from the number 6 topic is as we look at budget, we should be analyzing our fee structure at a minimum a 10-year window to say how sustainable those are versus expenses and revenue. And looking at that, that's the only way to get to that type of incremental change is to have a long-term view of what actual expenses you have, what actual revenues you anticipate coming in. If you don't have that, if you haven't done that work, which it is a lot of work to try to line out each one of those things, you're not going to be able to have that incremental thing. It's always going to be herky-jerky because you don't know. You kind of understand what it's going to be, but, you know, unless you go through and say, well, this is our 10-year project list. This is our 10-year, you know, anticipation for all these things. I don't know. I would not doubt that we need the money to make these budgets solvent. But unless I just can't get on board with something that doesn't have a long-term analysis to it, some sort of rate structure analysis, at least on a 10-year window. Thank you.
Carla?
So the wastewater, I do have a spreadsheet that we look over 20, 30 years. Which has all depreciation on it. And I guess I didn't know the extent of the discussion today. I know, so we could put this on another work session. I can, you know, send out those spreadsheets. They're very large to everybody so they could look at them. And we have looked at different rates of $1 here. And I know in the past, the last time we raised it was in 2013 for the 2014 year. And it was a $5 jump then. And the council at that time said, you know, they looked at, let's just do a $5 jump. We know we're doing these projects. We have some money that'll be in there instead of raising the rate every year. Because then people complain you're raising the rate every year. So, you know, it's a juggling system on how you do that. But like I said, I can share that spreadsheet with you. And we can, you know, look further in discussion. I guess part of this is that we are looking for what the feel of it is and what your needs were when David brought this up. So, you know, I guess the point is, what do you want from us to have more discussion on this?
I And from that, if you don't mind, Mr. President, I guess I don't need to see a 30,000 line spreadsheet. What I need to see is a 10-year chart that shows revenues, expenses, and rate over 10 years, listed out every year for whatever, and list a thing for each expense. You know, what's the 10 things that you're anticipating those costs, or what's the effective, you know, list every year in that these are our anticipated expenses change. This is the projects that we anticipate to do over those 10 years, and that's what you need. I mean, we don't need to look at, I don't know, 30,000 lines of, or.
And it's not 30,000 line, but it's
I'm
the
not,
30
I
years.
didn't say, I said 30,000.
Yeah, 30 years of data. So just what you said, we're doing 30 years of data. We got depreciation built in. We have, you know, rates at a certain, you know, we have rates built in. We have expenses built in at a 3% inflation for every year. So, you know, I can surely send that out. You know, I think that we should set a time to discuss that once we set it out.
I guess my
And
point is
maybe
it needs
another
to be
meeting.
communicated, and in my opinion,
Correct.
just saying $5 and $4 to make ourselves solvent isn't communicating. Saying, we're going to give you every piece of data that we have, and you figure it out, isn't communicating. Communicating is telling us exactly what we're going to be using this for in a concise and informational way. Thank you.
So I guess if I can elaborate on that a little bit. When this one came up, as far, because there was the two aspects of it. One is the making it solvent, and the other one was for the replacement part of it. But for the solvent part of it, we do have that long-term plan. We do know what we anticipated what our replacement costs, infrastructure costs, and those types of things are going to be. You know, and they vary a little bit. But what hit us this particular not cycle, but recently is with sending with wastewater particular, is sending our wastewater to Grand Forks, in what the cost is on what we're having to pay to have them treat our water, our wastewater. And I'm not going to put this on Grand Forks because what they're charging us per 1,000 gallon is actually less than what they had quoted us during the when we were negotiating these and putting together the contract. What's happened is the rate, the strength of our wastewater has increased, and it's costing us more. We're having to pay more because the strength has gone up, even though they're charging us less than what they quoted a year back for the 1,000 gallons. So, I guess it's. I guess I'm going to say it's a little bit difficult to figure out how to communicate this the best way to the council, because it's kind of a complex issue in its there's several variables of it. So let's for the stormwater, for the wastewater and the $3 part of it, the main reason for it is our expenses, particularly our treatment expenses, have gone up more than what we anticipated, even though I said the Grand Forks isn't charging us that same amount. Plus, we're experiencing some other issues on some of our pumps and that type of thing. For whatever reason, what's getting down into the sewer lines is worse and stronger. I mean, some of the stuff that's getting down there is chewing up our pumps, and I don't know, some of the stuff that they're pulling out of there, I don't know how people are getting them down into the sanitary sewer lines, what access they have in there, how they're getting the things that they're finding in there. But so those are some of the background reasons. So the $3, it's from what we see, from what our expenses have raised these last probably 3 years, in what we anticipate for our costs, and there is why we came up with that number. The other two, the $2 for each, that was just if we each dollar adds this much of revenue that comes in, and we just use it as a kind of a placeholder at $2, this would bring in this much, and that's probably what we could use for that. So that's really where those numbers came from.
Mr. President, sorry.
I'm going to go to Steve first.
No, I was going to say, kind of on the replacement part of it, I mean, when we kind of looked at that, Jason and Carla and I, we looked at kind of like 3-4 different areas in town and tried to come up with almost like a cost per foot to replace sanitary, storm, and everyone was unique, because as we looked at these 4 different project areas, you know, you had one project area the sanitary sewer was down the back easement, and there was very little storm sewer in that area, maybe 4 catch basins within a 2-block area. And then the next area, you looked at it, you had sanitary sewer running right down the middle of the street. You had your storm sewer trunk line running right down the middle of the street. So it was very difficult to come up with a good hard number that worked for everything. So again, like Mr. Murphy said, I think what we kind of did is we just looked at it and thought, okay, if we could raise an additional $100,000 per year in that fund, you know, we'd have those monies available for when we do a street reconstruction project, or if Jason needs to do a sewer relining project, you would just have those funds available. Kind of like Water and Light does on an annual basis. They're budgeting $350,000, $400,000 a year. They're budgeting that for annual water main replacement, and that's just what they do. So,
Mayor?
You know, some years ago, we added a $250,000 line item to our public works for all the miscellaneous patchwork that had to be done. And all of a sudden, the condition of our streets coming out of winter into spring and all the potholes, we were right on top of it. And it was a pleasure just driving around. It was a lot less beating up your car and wear and tear. And this has a lot of that same feel to it. We're basically creating the funds that are needed to do proper maintenance instead of, you know, cutting corners here and scrimping there. And so, but if that happens or doesn't, it's totally fine. But I would ask that we, you know, maybe if we have unanswered questions, get to our staff. They're always available and willing to answer questions. If we need a little more of a deep dive into the numbers or whatever. Because we want to move on our street reconstruction on 5th and 20th, we want to just have the answer to that $4 question. The $4, which would be, again, to do some additional work on storm and sanitary. So if we could answer that, I would love to see this just come for a vote to the full council. And I'm not going to hard push for one way or the other. I think for sure we want to do the 5 to maintain the solvency of those funds. To me, the 4 is a little in question. We just want to answer that. Then we turn around and plug those numbers back into whatever we're doing up on 5th and 20th. And we can take the next step and meet with the community members and get that project moving. So I don't want to put any kind of funky pressure on this, but I do think we've talked about it for quite a while. I think we're probably ready to answer those last few questions and vote on it.
Mr. Demers. Oh, you have your mask on, I think, on.
I guess, I mean, looking at that project, just so that we can give them an answer, I don't know if you add that extra $4, I don't know how much money that's going to offset that project by. Do you have any idea? I mean, there's not much actual sanitary and storm on that project.
I can just tell you, Mr. Demers, it's in the formula, right? So it's either in there to them as part of their special assessment or it's out. That's all. And it's real money, but we just need to know if it's in or if it's out, even the extent of the project. Because if it's going to be specially assessed, I guarantee some of that will stay under there. Just because this project is going to be at the top of what those folks are able to pay either way. And so without that, some of that old infrastructure, 50-year-old sewer line, will just have to stay there and hope and pray that it doesn't rupture or whatever. And part of our problem with the processing of our wastewater too is any infiltration into our storm sewer, which you have, you know, little breaks and openings and infiltration takes place. That adds to that cost. So you may actually save on the back end by not running that groundwater into, in this case, the sanitary sewer, I meant to say. So the groundwater infiltrating the sanitary sewer, adding to the flows. If we can avoid some of that, there could be some savings on the back end too.
You don't have to preach to me about the benefit of good underground utilities. I'm saying if you look at that project, there's not much of the storm or sanitary that affects the project. So, but
just have to know one way or the other.
And is this not to pick them? So would this be a 100% offset then, or are people I mean, because Water and Light, the policy is, you know, once you pay for your initial specials and everything to get your water installed, everything, it's built in our rate structure to replace your water line or reline it or whatever. Like you said, we set aside a certain amount to do projects, you know, in the next 5 years. Is that the idea that this board has, is that 100% of sanitary and storm will now be funded through this account?
I guess I gotta say that I don't know that that's it, where everybody decided it's not in our policy now, and I know that, you know, that's a very good question, and that's something that would have to be decided by the council. We don't have a policy addressing that. That would be one that would have to be made.
I guess to me, it seems to raise dollars in search of a purpose is different than having a purpose and raising the dollars to do it. And that's my only thing. And unless you understand what you want, to your point, we're going to do this 100%, I'm all for it. That's fine. But I don't want to do it backwards. And then I feel like it's a potential for waste and whatever. So my point is come up with the idea. I don't understand how you can raise money to do all this stuff if you don't know how much you actually have to pay for it. You know, if you don't know if we're offsetting it 50%, if we're offsetting it 70%, or we have this much money and we're only going to do 300 feet this year, or I don't know. It seems like it's too vague for me right now.
I would say, sorry, in response to that, Mr. Demers, even on paving projects, sometimes we'll patch asphalt that's 12 feet wide and 40 feet long, and should that have been assessed? I mean, there's always going to be that break point where that fund of $250,000 can cover the patch, and then somewhere you'll cross that line where it can't. And so there's going to have to be some discernment on all these things as to how we would use any of these funds.
Carla, I'll come to you in a second.
Thank you.
The thing that I question is this. Well, I'll just come on and say, is this the way like we did Brandon Boulevard where we did the $25,000? I'm going to bring it up. Finding a way to cover costs for these people to get their project done, and the city's going to pay for it. Somehow, everybody else is going to pay for it across the board, the way we took the money out of the budget last time to pay for that. And I agree with MERS on finding money for a project to lower the cost of the specials on them, which, you know, I don't know the dollar amount for what it costs to do this would replace, but if we're going to do this and we're not going to have a policy set to do this going forward all the time, I would have a tough time. Because if we just do it one time and not do it for anybody else, people are going to start questioning and asking.
Oh, I think this is a policy question for sure. Yep, and I think that's the direction this whole, we laid it out just as clean as we could. That's the direction we would be looking for, is whatever we do here, we would do it every time the same going forward.
Well, I don't think you laid it up transparently until you said it. It had to do with 20th and 5th. That's when it came out, really, of wanting to do this.
Well, it has to be decided in advance of that project. And I'd say 80% of these dollars, if we do this, will happen outside of street projects. You know, we don't do a major street reconstruction every year, maybe 1 out of 5. And so 80% of these dollars will be spent to be more intentional about scheduled replacement of sewer lines, storm and sanitary. Probably 1 year out of 5 we'll do a street project and the funds will go to that. So it really is across the board to be more intentional and more deliberate in how we manage and maintain our sewer systems.
Steve. Carla, I'm still going to get to you, sorry. Go ahead.
That's fine.
Steve, go ahead.
And I was going to say, I mean, as we discuss these funds, again, we're not discussing these funds for a specific project. It just happens to be that 5th and 20th is kind of right on the near horizon, so I think everyone keeps thinking that's why we're trying to generate these funds. But again, it's future maintenance.
I wasn't thinking it until you said it. So,
I think that's the way Mr. Vedder would feel right now too if he's here tonight. He'd feel that we're trying to create these funds to take care of that 20th Street, and I'd have to feel like him. You know what? Everybody else has paid their dues. If they want that road fixed, they can pay their dues.
And honestly, if that's the preference of the group, we can work with it. We just have to know which way. This came actually to me from staff, just so everybody knows. This suggestion came to me from staff, and I thought it sounded good. And yet, if the group does not feel that it's a good step, it's totally fine. I think the 5 is a pretty solid decision, the $5, to keep those funds solvent. And the second one, there's room for some good debate.
Carla.
Thank you. So I just want to let the group know that when Steve and Jason and the mayor and David also met, I know Steve and Jason and I got into a little more detail. The intention was to raise dollars so that we could do the same kind of replacement that Water and Light does, and that we could maybe do these together. So when Water and Light replaces a water line, we would replace a sewer line or a storm line when the street or the yards are ripped up, so we don't come back and rip it up again, that we'd have dollars to do those at the same time and be more efficient by doing them together. And Steve and Jason, you can pipe in anytime, but that was the intention when we started looking at this. Yes, part of it came down to 20th because we knew those lines had some severe major reconstruction that needed to be done, so we don't want to put a street in and then rip the street out like David talked about before. We want to be recognize issues going on and try to do them all at the same time so that, you know, our residents don't have their street disrupted. We don't tear out a new street and put new lines in, and they'll ask, why didn't you do this at the same time, even within 5 years? So this is kind of where the conversation came up with. You know, I know they worked with the water department. It's like, okay, what needs to be done in that street? Because we don't want to tear up the street and then have to do it again. So that's where the discussion has led and came from.
We try to do it that way, but another thing is, a lot of our oldest infrastructure was down in the Sherlock Park area and some of the areas that got flooded out. Now it's coming to be that, we're getting some areas where it is old infrastructure, and whether we dig it up and replace the line, or we can reline it in some cases and not dig it up, we're still going to have funds to replace some of this aging infrastructure. And it wouldn't be any different than Water and Light as far as how they do their projects. If they have the money, they'll replace so many linear feet of line one year, let's say, and next year maybe it's not as big a project, and so on and so forth. So if we had a large project coming up, maybe we'd save those funds for a couple of years to pay for a large replacement of an area. And if we had a street project coming up, we'd be mindful of that as well, like how much we need for that project in 5 years. So the amount we spend each year would be different all the time. It wouldn't be that set, let's say 100,000 every year. It might be 200,000 one year and 40,000 the next. But one way or the other, we have to start replacing or relining some of the infrastructure, or we're going to all start to crumble at once.
Anybody else have any questions or input?
Well, this is Keith.
Yes, Keith.
I mean, we have the utility meetings where we coordinate, and I agree with everything that was said by Jason and Carla. And another thing that's done, and I'm sure Jason does it, is, we kind of know several years out, and we try our hardest to make sure we don't dig the street up more than once, because that's costly.
Keith, there's also, our capital plan is 5 years?
Yep.
So we go through and we have a 5-year plan of what we're going to do. So I could like I said before, in theory, I'm all for the city having a fund that we raise to do all this stuff. I just feel, like I said, we're raising the funds in search of projects instead of having the projects in search of funds. I think we should go along, have a 5-year capital improvement plan, price out in a budgetary, structure, doesn't have to be, to a, project, analysis, but have a general idea of what that cost is, marry it to the water and light budget, but have a plan first and then go about funding it. That's my problem, is it feels like we're putting this money in and then we're searching funding. And with the road maintenance thing, yeah, we do have a little bit of flexibility, but it's a maintenance. This is replacement. This is a fully different thing than just like going and replacing a curb and gutter here or a patch on a road here. And yeah, we're going to have some discernment, but if we came out and said, yeah, we want to replace this many lineal feet of street a year, or this many lineal feet of, storm and sanitary, and then marry it to what the water and light does and come up with a plan for 5 years and figure out how to raise, or how much that's going to cost, I'd be all for that. But we're not doing that. We're just saying, we're going to try to raise this and then we'll figure it out as we go. And I feel like that's the wrong way to do it. That's my only point.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, Keith.
I like the idea, which one of the, I think it was Councilmember Demers mentioned that, have a little more discussion on it. And so one item related to that would be the street light process we have with water and light, that we have with the city. That we replace and maintain the lights, and there's a fee collected, and now we're changing out all these lights. And so now that's going to drop that wattage by probably 2/3. And so maybe we tie that in with this discussion on where water and light fits in.
Mr. Repel.
I think the issue got clouded when you brought up 20th. If we took that out of the whole picture and just stood by what we're doing here, the dollars and cents, get the plan in place, again, marry it with everybody else, it'd be a done deal. So let's bring it down to the simple form.
The only reason I wanted to make sure that 5th and 20th was in the conversation is those funds, a portion of them would be allocated to that.
It's after the fact.
Right on. But it's all, that would be part of it.
Having go back 15 minutes, you've not mentioned that, it'd probably be okay with me, because that's where you got me going, no, hang on a second.
You had to bring up that whole 25,000,
well,
didn't you?
The other thing we're talking here too is we're talking about water and light, and we all know water and light has a whole lot more than this money than the city has.
But we can tap into their money.
So I agree with the mayor 100% on let's fix it right the first time instead of going back and tearing it up again, because we've seen that happen so much in both sides of the river,
I think everybody agrees with that.
Yeah, and so it's just a matter of, as we've been discussing here, is coming to some kind of a term, and maybe it is for more discussion, further discussion,
Charlotte.
All right. Thank you. I think Steve and Jason have projects in mind if you really wanted a list of them. Because I know I watch Jason when you're saying that. I know he's got lots of things at the top of his mind that, and we're doing some more. We're going to do some more cameraing this year, and it's on the next council meeting. So, that really tells us what's going to go on with those videos. And so if you wanted a list of projects, I'm pretty sure Steve and Jason could put a little guesstimation list together and things that need to be done that we've been postponing if we knew we had dollars to do that. And then the other comment I wanted to make was that in Sunday's paper, the Grand Forks wastewater system is looking at expanding and raising their rates. My understanding is that when the council met with Grand Forks on the COSA, that those were already built in. So just so our residents know that there's an increase in Grand Forks, there's not going to be another increase because of Grand Forks' increase. I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that.
Alrighty.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything? Do I have a lot more listening to do? Not, are you satisfied what you're going to bring forth next week? Or?
Nothing about 20th.
Okay.
I believe we have what we need.
You can talk to the mayor later.
Yeah.
So. All right, let's move on. Number 8, discussion on federal subtarget projects. And one of my suggestions is, I know we don't have a couple councilmen here, is if we go through this, I know we need to discuss it, but in my mind right away is, I know we're probably not going to have one of them here, but since Clarence isn't here tonight, is there a way maybe we would have to call a special meeting to discuss this, because I know your timelines? If you know what I mean, we can discuss stuff tonight.
Carry to Monday?
We have that meeting on Monday. We could, if you want, we'll already be meeting if you want to do it
Well,
afterwards.
that's what I'm asking, because I would feel that Mr. Vedder would appreciate being a part of these discussions.
Although we have a golden opportunity right here.
I thought this was about a 3-minute agenda item.
Oh, yeah.
You have a opportunity to talk, but you don't have an opportunity to vote.
That's a great idea. I like it.
But I just want to be fair for the discussions of, I don't know if everybody else is in agreement with that. Is that fine with you, Mr. Norris? Okay.
As long as we're okay going a little bit longer on Monday night, sure. You don't have to be there, Megan. No, you don't. I can take the minutes.
Just have to transcribe them, so Megan. That's what she's thinking, so. Do you want to just push it, or do you want to then go through everything instead of getting in and all of a sudden we're in the...
Yeah, I guess the only thing, we could push it off. The only thing I want to say is that staff did identify some potential projects that we could do. The only thing I want to say is just keep in mind for Monday that the federal subtarget dollars can only be used on the green and red streets on your map. So based on that, staff did come up with some other potential projects that we could use the federal subtarget dollars for, and we'll get you that list. And then that's really just, that's the only thing I would have before Monday.
And we're certainly not using it on the Grand Forks side.
Yeah.
Of that map.
So I would draw everyone's attention to the Steve Emery email dated May 7th, 2021, and it did include those 4. And then it also included an update on some developments going on Bigland Road and 13th. So if you don't mind, go ahead and just print that off, even each of you for Monday night. And that will give you a good starting point for the discussion. And I will say, I appreciate the pause that we put in place to reconsider these projects, to the use of those federal subtarget dollars. I appreciate the pause that came, and we'll reconsider these 4 things, and the roundabout will be one of them. The Bigland-Reinhardt roundabout will be one of them. And coming out of this process, whatever the majority of council members want, I will support. Okay.
So I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Riepel. Second by Larson. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion is carried. Meeting is adjourned.
What's on your socks?
They stink.